Virginia Senator and former U.S. Vice Presidential candidate Tim Kaine has been campaigning for political office since 1994. He has held a Virginia seat in the U.S. Senate since 2012. Now Kaine is seeking re-election to the U.S. Senate. The senator is facing Republican U.S. Senate candidate Corey Stewart. Kaine is addressing the vacancy on the Supreme Court and President Donald Trump's initiating trade wars.
This is the most important nomination that the Senate ever votes on, as the Supreme Court position is both consequential and for life. You would normally expect somebody might be on the bench for 20 to 30 years, especially of the age that Judge Kavanaugh is. So that means we have to take it very, very seriously. I have some significant questions for Judge Kavanaugh. I want to meet with him in person to ask him my questions, and I want to see how he handles the Judiciary Committee hearing before I announce any final decision on his nomination.
U.S. Circuit Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh is 53 years old. President Trump recently nominated Kavanaugh for the U.S. Supreme Court.
The questions that I'm most interested in are things that Virginians are interested in. First, there are cases working their way up that could gut the Affordable Care Act, take health insurance away from millions of people. Judge Kavanaugh has a written record dissenting in an earlier opinion dealing with the Affordable Care Act, and I'm going to ask him about that opinion and try to make sure that he is not coming onto the court with an agenda to harm the health of Virginians and Americans.
The former attorney says he's concerned about the U.S. maintaining the 14th Amendment. It was revised to the U.S. Constitution in 1968 as a result of Brown versus Board of Education.
The 14th Amendment, 150th anniversary of it, was this past Monday, is very important. It's a pillar to current American jurisprudence, especially the rulings about the equality of all persons. And I want to talk to Judge Kavanaugh, after I've scrutinized his record, about his commitment to equality and civil rights for all.
The 14th Amendment was also argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Roe v. Wade for reproductive rights.
Confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, I would follow Roe v. Wade faithfully and fully. That would be binding precedent in the court. It's been decided by the Supreme Court.
Ask you your own opinion.
And I'm saying if I were confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, Senator, I would follow it. It's been reaffirmed many times, including in Planned Parenthood versus.
I understand, but what is your opinion? You're not on the bench yet. You've talked about these issues in the past to other people, I'm sure.
The Supreme Court has held repeatedly, Senator, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to give a personal view on that case.
The freedom of women to make their own health care decisions on matters of reproductive health care, very, very important. Cases like Griswold versus Connecticut, Roe versus Wade. What will Judge Kavanaugh say about those decisions, and will he pledge to follow those laws, or is he somebody who is set on reducing women's freedom to make their own health care choices?
Kaine questions the U.S. Supreme Court nominee's stance on unconstitutional acts by the president or Congress.
His attitude about the role of the Article III branch in providing an effective check against unconstitutional actions, either by Congress or by the president. He's had some writings and some opinions, including in the Affordable Care Act case I mentioned earlier, that suggested, for example, that a president could refuse to enforce a law validly passed by the Article I branch of Congress, even that has been upheld as constitutional by the Article III judiciary branch, and why he believes the president should have the ability to fail to enforce constitutional laws, I find puzzling.
Kaine admitted he was disappointed by President Trump's initiating trade wars against other nations. During his campaign stops, he's heard from countless farmers complaining about the tariffs.
I think the president has blundered on the imposition of these tariffs. The tariffs that are being imposed in retaliation by other nations are hitting pork, chickens, soybeans very, very hard. As well as apples and other agricultural products. And I heard particularly when I was on the road last week from those who are in the soybean farmers that these tariffs are hurting them very, very badly. And we're seeing this all over the country. I expect to hear the same when I talk to poultry industry representatives later today.
Kaine says he agrees with some of Trump's motives, but not the president's actions.
Taking trade action against China to enforce against them when they're stealing intellectual property of American companies, I don't think that the president's motive is wrong. I think we have to be tough against China. It just happens that this blunt instrument that the president is using rather than, for example, filing cases in the International Trade Court. There are other ways you can do this other than the imposition of tariffs that I think is likely to have more success and cause less damage to the Virginia economy.
The senator took calls from residents about their issues.
One of the issues that I heard, and I heard it probably most directly at a farmer's market in Halifax on Saturday, were deep concern about the trade wars that the president has initiated, beginning with import tariffs on imported aluminum and steel, but now the retaliation that's taking place by other nations. They don't accept the imposition of tariffs and just say fine. They impose retaliatory tariffs, and these tariffs are hitting Virginia agriculture very hard.
Most of the people calling the senator wanted answers about Judge Kavanaugh's nomination.
In his younger days as an attorney, Brett Kavanaugh was very tough against the executive when he was working with Ken Starr to investigate and recommend legal action against President Clinton. So he has a record of not being deferential to a Democratic president, but more recently his articles would suggest a great deal of deference to presidents on matters of whether they can be investigated, subpoenaed, prosecuted, indicted. And that's going to be a significant issue of concern when I interview him and when he is before the Judiciary Committee.
Elaine Rackley for Breaking Through News.